Imagine discovering a horrifying family secret that drives a preacher to cut off his father's manhood in a fit of rage. A twisted betrayal shatters everything he believes in, and a lifetime of trust is destroyed in an instant. This is the story of a man whose faith and family were everything, until a brutal truth turned his world upside down. Pastor Isaiah Carter, 42, was the embodiment of devotion in his North Carolina community. Known for his fiery sermons on faith, family, and moral values, Isaiah's ministry drew hundreds of followers who saw him as a beacon of righteousness. His dedication to his church and his family earned him admiration, with many viewing him as the living example of the virtues he preached. Keisha Carter, 38, was the perfect counterpart to Isaiah. Graceful and composed, she balanced her roles as a preacher's wife and the dedicated mother of their 5 children: Amara, 16, Isaiah Jr., 14, Malik, 12, Nia, 9, and Jalen, 6. Keisha's presence in the community was constant, leading Sunday school, organizing charity drives, and supporting Isaiah's ministry at every step. Together, they presented the image of a family blessed by faith, living a life others could only aspire to. At the heart of their spiritual foundation was Deacon Joseph Carter, Isaiah's 65-year-old father, a respected elder in the church. Joseph had spent decades serving as a deacon and a moral compass for the congregation. His influence on Isaiah's upbringing was profound. From a young age, Joseph had instilled in his son a deep reverence for God, a commitment to family, and an unwavering adherence to Scripture. Isaiah often credited his father during sermons, praising him as the rock upon which their family had been built. The Carter household was vibrant with activity. Amara, 16, was thoughtful and academically driven, often helping with church youth programs. Isaiah Jr., 14, was reserved but attentive, always eager to lend a hand during church services. Malik, 12, was the family's curious and playful spirit, while Nia, 9, was known for her sensitivity and eagerness to please. The youngest, Jalen, 6, was the light of the family, doted on by everyone, and blissfully unaware of life's complexities. Sunday dinners at Joseph's home were a cherished family tradition. These gatherings often began with scripture readings and heartfelt prayers led by Joseph himself, followed by lively discussions about the church and community. For Isaiah, these moments were a source of pride, a symbol of the strong bond that connected the Carter family and their shared dedication to their faith. One evening at dinner, the Carter family sat gathered around their oak dining table, enjoying a rare moment of laughter and togetherness. Amara, their eldest at 16, spoke up with excitement in her voice. "For my genealogy project at school, I thought it would be fun if we all did a DNA test. We can find out about our ancestry, maybe even find distant relatives." Her younger siblings, Isaiah Jr., 14, Malik, 12, Nia, 9, and Jalen, 6, buzzed with excitement, chiming in with their guesses about hidden royal bloodlines or mysterious family origins. Isaiah, always supportive of his children's pursuits, smiled warmly. "That sounds like a great idea. It'll be something we can all do together." Across the table, Keisha's smile faltered. She reached for her glass of water, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know, Amara," she said softly. "These things aren't always accurate, and they can be invasive." Her voice trailed off as she glanced at Joseph, who was seated at the head of the table, his usual stern expression unchanging. "Come on, Keisha," Isaiah said, brushing off her hesitation. "What's the harm? It's just a fun family activity, and it'll be good for Amara's project." He reached over and placed his hand over hers, offering her a reassuring smile. "We've got nothing to hide." Keisha looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable, before nodding slowly. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The children cheered as Isaiah pulled out his phone to order the DNA kits. Joseph gave a tight smile but said nothing, sipping his coffee in silence. A few weeks later, The results arrived. Amara eagerly gathered everyone around the computer as Isaiah logged into the website. The room buzzed with excitement as they explored the reports, ancestral origins, historical connections, and distant relatives. But as Isaiah scrolled through the results, his brow furrowed. Something didn't add up. "Wait," he said, leaning closer to the screen. "This says I'm not a match to any of the kids as their biological father." He laughed nervously, shaking his head. "That's obviously a mistake. Probably some kind of database error." Keisha froze, her hand tightening around the edge of the chair. Joseph's gaze flicked to Isaiah, his face calm, but his jaw visibly clenched. "I'll reach out to the company," Isaiah said, his voice firm but composed. "They probably just mixed up the data." He stood from the table and kissed Keisha on the top of her head. "Don't worry about it. I'll get it sorted out." Over the next few days, Isaiah contacted the genealogy company, pointing out the error in their report. He explained the issue in detail, confident they'd come back with a correction, but when their response arrived, it left him reeling. "We've triple-checked the results," the company representative explained over the phone. "There's no mistake. The children's biological father is someone other than you, and the markers match another close relative within your submitted samples." Isaiah's heart sank. He asked them to confirm again, but the answer remained the same. The only possible match within the submitted samples was his father, Joseph. The weight of the revelation crushed him. His mind raced back to subtle moments, Joseph's frequent visits, the way Keisha had grown quiet whenever he was around, her initial resistance to the DNA test. It all began to make horrifying sense. That evening, Isaiah returned home, clutching the printed DNA results. Keisha was in the living room folding laundry. He threw the papers onto the table, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Explain this," he demanded, his voice cold and sharp. Keisha's eyes darted to the papers, then to Isaiah. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The DNA results," Isaiah snapped. "They're saying I'm not the father of my children, but they also say there's another match in our family. Care to explain that?" Keisha's face paled as she clutched the back of the chair for support. There must be a mistake," she stammered. "That can't be right." Isaiah leaned closer, his voice rising. "Don't lie to me, Keisha. I went back to the company. They verified it. There's no mistake. So I'll ask you again. Explain this." Keisha broke down, tears streaming down her face as she sank into the chair. Through sobs, she confessed to a dark secret she had kept buried for years. Early in their marriage, Joseph had coerced her into a sexual relationship. His influence and authority made her feel powerless to resist, and the abuse had continued for years. "All 5 of them," Keisha whispered, her voice breaking. "They're all his. I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't want to destroy you, Isaiah." Isaiah staggered back, the room spinning around him. The woman he loved, the father he revered, they had shattered his life in the most personal and devastating way imaginable. He stormed out of the house, his mind a storm of rage, betrayal, and disbelief. Isaiah Carter sat alone in his car that night, the weight of Keisha's confession pressing down on him like a physical force. His mind raced, each thought darker and more chaotic than the last. The life he had built, his faith, his family, his ministry, had been a lie. His children, his pride and joy were not his. His wife, the woman he had trusted above all, had been trapped in a horrifying secret. And his father, the man who had raised him, guided him, and taught him to live by God's word, was a monster. The emotions came in waves: shock, pain, disbelief, then anger so blinding it took his breath away. Isaiah gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Tears streamed down his face as he shouted into the empty car, "Why? How could they do this to me?" He slammed his fists against the dashboard, the frustration boiling over. He drove aimlessly for hours,
the streets of his quiet North Carolina town empty under the moonlight. Memories of family dinners, sermons about forgiveness, and the moments he thought defined his perfect life flooded his mind, now tinged with betrayal. Everywhere he turned in his thoughts, he was met with lies. As dawn broke, Isaiah found himself parked at the edge of a lake, staring out at the water. In the stillness of the morning, his pain began to transform into something colder, sharper: vengeance. The betrayal was too great to forgive, the wounds too deep to heal. In his mind, there was only one way to bring justice to the situation. His father and his wife needed to pay for what they had done. Isaiah began to plan, the clarity of his thoughts startling him. He had spent years preaching forgiveness, but forgiveness was no longer an option. His heart, once full of compassion, now burned with the need for retribution. He replayed Keisha's confession over and over, each word fueling his resolve. When Isaiah returned home, he was calm, eerily so. He didn't speak much to Keisha, who had spent the night crying in their bedroom. He couldn't look at his children without feeling a sharp pang of grief, knowing they weren't his. But he still loved them fiercely. That love only deepened his anger. The evening was heavy with tension as Isaiah returned home. Keisha sat alone in the living room, her tear-streaked face pale and anxious.
She had spent the entire day on edge, dreading the inevitable confrontation. Isaiah entered the room silently, his eyes dark and emotionless, a kitchen knife concealed in his grip. Keisha looked up, her face twisting with a mixture of fear and hope. "Isaiah," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I know you're hurt, but we can—" "Don't," he interrupted, his voice low and icy. "Don't you dare try to fix this with words. You've destroyed everything, Keisha. Everything." Keisha stood, wringing her hands as tears began streaming down her face. "I was trapped, Isaiah. I didn't know how to stop it. I never wanted to hurt you." Isaiah's laugh was sharp and bitter, cutting through her words like the knife he gripped. "You didn't want to hurt me? You let him violate our marriage, father my children, and sit at our table as if nothing was wrong. You lied to me every single day, Keisha." She fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, Isaiah, I love you. I love you. We can fix this." "Fix this?" Isaiah snapped, his rage finally erupting. "This can't be fixed. You've condemned me to live a lie, and now you'll pay for it." With a sudden, savage movement, he plunged the knife into her chest. Keisha gasped, her eyes wide with shock, as the blade tore through her body. Isaiah's face was devoid of mercy as he pulled the knife out and struck again, this time in her abdomen. The room was filled with the sickening sound of flesh tearing and her anguished cries. Keisha tried to crawl away, her blood pooling on the floor, but Isaiah was relentless. Each stab was fueled by years of betrayal and humiliation. "You should have told me the truth," he shouted, his voice shaking with rage. "You should have stopped him." When Keisha finally lay still, her body a lifeless heap on the blood-soaked carpet, Isaiah stepped back, panting heavily. The fire inside him didn't subside. It only shifted focus. There was still one more person who needed to face justice. The evening air was heavy as Isaiah drove to Joseph's house, his grip tight on the steering wheel, his mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and vengeance. The image of his lifeless wife burned into his memory. He had nothing left to lose, and justice in his eyes demanded blood. Bursting through the door, Isaiah found Joseph sitting at the dining table, a cup of tea in hand, and his Bible open in front of him. Startled, Joseph looked up. "Isaiah, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion and a flicker of fear. Isaiah didn't respond. Instead, he threw the crumpled DNA results onto the table. "Explain this," he demanded, his voice low and simmering with rage. Joseph's eyes darted to the paper and then back to Isaiah. "I don't know what this is," he said, his voice faltering. "Don't you dare lie to me!" Isaiah snapped, his hands trembling. "You've been violating Keisha for years, haven't you? You fathered my children." Joseph stood, raising his hands as though to calm his son. "Isaiah, listen to me. It's not what you think." "Don't lie," Isaiah roared, his voice shaking the room. "You destroyed my family. You're a monster." Before Joseph could speak again, Isaiah lunged forward, plunging the knife into his father's side. Joseph cried out, stumbling backward and clutching at the wound. Blood seeped through his shirt as he tried to steady himself, but Isaiah didn't stop. With savage precision, Isaiah stabbed him again and again, each thrust driven by years of pent-up rage. Joseph collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain, his strength draining rapidly. "You deserve to feel the pain you inflicted on me," Isaiah growled, standing over his father. Joseph tried to crawl away, his breaths coming in short, desperate gasps, but his body was too weak to respond. Isaiah knelt beside him, his voice cold and steady. "This is for Keisha. This is for the years of lies. This is for my children." Gripping the knife tightly, Isaiah began the gruesome act of cutting off Joseph's manhood. Joseph's screams of agony filled the room, his body convulsing as blood pooled beneath him. Isaiah's expression was stone cold, his focus unwavering as he carried out his grotesque retribution. The pain proved too much for Joseph. His screams weakened, his body trembling violently before going limp. He exhaled one final ragged breath and then was silent. Isaiah dropped the knife, now slick with blood, and stumbled back, his chest heaving. The room reeked of iron and death, the echoes of Joseph's torment still ringing in his ears. For a moment, he stood there, staring at the lifeless body of the man he had once called his father. But there was no relief, no satisfaction, only a hollow emptiness where his faith and family had once been. Isaiah walked out of the house, his clothes soaked in blood. Then he sat on the front porch. The quiet neighborhood erupted in chaos when police arrived at Joseph's house, responding to frantic calls from neighbors who had heard horrifying screams and crashing noises. The officers, weapons drawn, approached cautiously, expecting resistance. Instead, they found Isaiah sitting on Joseph's front porch, drenched in blood, his Bible resting in his lap. Isaiah's demeanor was chillingly calm. He looked up at the officers as they approached, his expression unreadable. "It's done," he said simply, raising his hands in surrender. "God's justice has been served." The officers quickly handcuffed him, their unease palpable, as Isaiah was led to the patrol car. One officer cautiously ventured inside the house. What they discovered was beyond words, a scene of unimaginable violence. Joseph's body lay in a grotesque state, his chest riddled with stab wounds and his manhood cruelly severed. The pool of blood and the signs of struggle spoke volumes about the brutality of the act. As they placed Isaiah into the back seat of the car, he turned to one of the officers, his voice steady, almost casual. "Keisha," he said, "you'll find her at our house. She betrayed me too." The officers exchanged shocked glances, realizing the full scale of the horrors they were dealing with. Rushing to Isaiah's home, they found Keisha exactly as Isaiah had described. Her dismembered body lay in the living room, her remains scattered in a gruesome display of rage and methodical violence. Back at the station, Isaiah provided a chillingly detailed confession, his voice devoid of emotion. "She lied to me for years," he said of Keisha. "And my father, he ruined everything I believed in. They had to face the consequences." His calm recounting of the murders stunned the investigators. When pressed on his actions, Isaiah simply replied, "They destroyed our family. I just finished what they started." The dual crime scenes, the sheer brutality of the murders, and Isaiah's cold composure sent shockwaves through the community. Their once revered preacher had become a figure of terror, leaving a devastating legacy of violence and betrayal in his wake. Isaiah's trial drew national attention, a horrifying tale of betrayal, rage, and gruesome vengeance that captivated the public. The courtroom was packed with journalists, onlookers, and members of Isaiah's former congregation, all eager to see how the justice system would handle the preacher-turned-murderer. The defense painted Isaiah as a man driven to madness by unimaginable betrayal. They called on psychologists to testify about the trauma he endured upon learning the truth about his children's parentage and his father's abuse of Keisha. They described his actions as those of a man pushed past the limits of human endurance. The prosecution, however, focused on the premeditated and brutal nature of the murders, particularly the gruesome mutilation of his father. Prosecutors argued that while the betrayal he suffered was extreme, it could not justify the sheer violence of his actions. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the horrific circumstances against the brutality of Isaiah's crimes. In the end, they returned with a verdict of guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge, acknowledging the complexity of the case but bound by the law, sentenced Isaiah to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Isaiah's children, now orphans, were separated and placed in foster care, each struggling to come to terms with the horrific truths about their family. The once admired Carter family became a haunting cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how hidden secrets and betrayal can tear even the most devout lives apart. As Isaiah was led out of the courtroom in shackles, he carried his Bible tightly in hand, muttering prayers to a God he believed had guided his actions. To the public, he became a symbol of the destructive power of secrets and rage, a tragic figure who lost everything in his quest for justice. Isaiah Carter's descent from a pillar of faith to a figure of horror serves as a chilling testament to the destructive power of secrets and betrayal. This tale reminds us that even the most revered individuals are not immune to the chaos hidden truths can unleash. Do you believe Isaiah's actions were the inevitable result of betrayal? Or did he cross a line no amount of pain can justify? If this story left you questioning everything, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime cases that unravel the darkest sides of humanity.